welcome to episode 14 of my POA podcast, Black Hand and Beyond. Tonight is the Salty Plains Ranch, the Puffenbarger family. So Lynn and Winona Puffenbarger got into POAs in the late 1950s, and Lynn continued to raise POAs until the day he passed away just a few years ago. So of course Lynn was one of the leading breeders of all time, and we'll talk about some of those cool stories. This is going to be a long show, but I'm going to expedite it a little bit. I do apologize. You know my business. Sometimes I get deals right at the last minute, so I just literally got done signing a deal. So we're going to we're a little late starting, but that's fine. At least we're on live. And remember, we have people ask all the time, how do I find this? It's on the POA History Group. If you tell people, make sure they join the POA History Group. And there will be a little lag if you're watching tonight. There's always a little lag from the live episode. And then it will be on Facebook forever. As long as Facebook's around, it'll be on the history group. And possibly we may get this show on YouTube too, because I've had a lot of people, family members and stuff, wanting to know how to get on here if they're not on Facebook. So we do have a special guest tonight that will be on the phone. I'll be calling Jeremy Stevens later from Kansas. Of course, he is a big supporter and promoter of the Salty POAs and owns a lot of Salty bloodlines and still has a Salty stallion up there in Kansas. We also have some special guests in studio. They're not going to be mic'd up, but they're just here visiting. So they're actually customers of mine, and that's Ross and Lynetta Kressler. And of course, Lynetta is Lynetta Puffenbarger. So, and her husband Ross, they lived in Kansas. Now they live back in Cherokee. So they're sitting here, no nerves or anything when I have a Puffenbarger sitting here, so no, that's fine. So it's just going to make me try that much harder to do a good show. So we have a lot of pictures to go through. Some of these pictures are going to be, I'm going to go through them pretty fast because I literally had over 200 pictures to choose from. I want to thank everyone who I called out for pictures, and a lot of people sent me pictures. Of course, Lynetta and Tommy opened up the scrapbooks and really helped out. We have some rare images tonight we're going to see that are personal scrapbook pictures from the family. And I think one thing people's going to learn tonight, a lot of people knew Lynn in the last 20, 30 years and didn't really know the whole Puffenbarger family. And we're going to find out that it started out as a POA family experience like so many people do. And then, he always did breed POAs, but he just kept breeding POAs. And of course, grandkids rode and everything like that. But he kept a large breeding program, 5 or 6 stallions and a lot of mares throughout the years. So we're going to get started with some photos here. Okay, let's see. All right, if you're new to this, I usually have some technical difficulties. Okay, so let's see, that should be on the screen now. There we go. Okay. So there's Lynn Puffenbarger right there as a young man. He was a director for many years. I laugh because that says 1-year director. That was his term. He was a director for decades. He was actually the president of the POAC national directors for 6 or 7 years. In the mid-70s for 1 year, and then from 1980 to 1985 or 86, he was the president of the board of directors. So this is the picture I wanted to start off with. I thank the Puffenbarger family for allowing me to share this picture. I'd never seen this picture, and I just think it's great. I hope it don't bring up too many emotions, but talk about a museum quality POAC picture there, Lynn and Winona. And Winona doesn't get the credit she deserves for her contribution to POAs. We're going to talk about that tonight. Lynn being the driving force he was, the person he was, and then he just kept going to the shows years after Winona didn't. So everybody talks about Lynn, but Winona had a big part to do with it too, especially with the kids showing and making the outfits. And then of course over there on the right is Chief Little Britches, the stallion we're going to talk so much about tonight. So that's just a great picture there. I plan on hanging that picture up in this room eventually. So I'm going to turn this room into a little museum of sorts until POAC in Indianapolis starts one of their own, and then I'll ship stuff to them if they want it. So again, there's Lynn. There's a picture from his house of some of his achievements. Of course, he's in the POA Hall of Fame. He was one of the first people put in the Hall of Fame. Chief Little Britches was put in the Hall of Fame. He's a premier sire, a supreme champion. He was the first supreme champion stallion. He won a lot of stuff. And but we got a lot of story to cover before we get to Little Britches. So here's a pretty cool photo here. Like I say, they broke open the scrapbooks. So it was a family deal for the Puffenbargers. All three kids, Loretta, Lynetta, and Tommy, showed POAs, and then all four grandkids showed POAs later. So this is actually Lynn's brother, Cotton, who's holding the POA here, and I think that's Tommy. So that's Tommy as a baby. I won't say how old Tommy is now, but he's nearing retirement. So that's an old colored photo there, but a great photo. So here's all three kids mounted on POAs. So, and I don't know if I get all these POAs right, but I know WPF's Pistol Pete's in the front there. That's Tommy. And then Lynetta's on the end with a WPF's Pawnee Prince, I believe. What's that?
Yeah,
that's right.
And the middle one's Eagle.
And that's Eagle, okay. And that's the oldest. Loretta is the oldest, right? And she's on Eagle in the middle. So you'll see they're well mounted. And Lynn didn't have that big ego where he didn't mount his kids on horses that wasn't bred by him. I mean, he tried to, but in the early days, you know, he believed in just getting good, safe ponies. Of course, Lynn was like a lot of early day POA breeders and promoters. They were for sale. You know, you'll see some of these ads where he'd sell them and then they'd start out with another new one or step up, especially as the kids grew and got older. And you'll see Tommy riding different ones. No audio, but it's spelling it out, okay? Tracy Keene, do you got audio? Tracy, tell me if you have audio or not. Jan Rogers says she doesn't have audio. I can hear it. Somebody said, okay, Jan, you may want to check your connections. So here's another picture. It's in color. Now, the first one with the yellow or orange, that's Loretta, and that's Cayuga's Spider Britches. And that was a Chief Little Britches offspring from Lalonde's. And then Tommy's on the end with Pistol Pete again. And who are you riding there?
Salty Cactus.
That's Cactus. Okay, you moved on to Salty Cactus Britches, and we have some pictures of that one too with Lynn showing. So that's a cool picture, and that's in that little arena there in Cherokee, isn't it? I mean, on the farm there. Mm-hmm. Yep, I recognize that ground. Okay, so there's Cayuga Spider Britches Supreme Champion. See the ad there? Loretta is holding him there. And he's for sale, of course, but he was a Supreme Champion. And he went on to do a lot of things, but Loretta won quite a bit with him. Again, he was a son of Chief Little Britches. So there's one of our guests tonight. That's Lynetta, pretty young there, all decked out, and that's WPF's Pawnee Prince. So they had WPF's Pawnee Prince and WPF's Pistol Pete. Of course, Pistol Pete's OSU's mascot here in Oklahoma, in Stillwater. And then Lynn also had some other WPFs that he used as breeding animals. Here's Lynetta with Salty Cactus Britches. It's a good picture, action shot there at a big show. Lynetta commented to me last night that, and Lynn, you know, being a breeder, he would be that way, take pictures at big shows and big events, fairs. You'll see a lot of these pictures are either in Tulsa later years or at Oklahoma City at the state fair, or they're at big shows. They went to New York and California and all over. The Puffenbargers traveled a lot to the major shows of the day. There's a lot of pictures of Tommy in here, maybe because he's a baby. I don't know. He sent me some pictures last night up to about 12 o'clock last night. My phone was buzzing, so he was sending pictures. So that's Pistol Pete again, WPF's Pistol Pete. And then he moved on to St. Nick's Vigilante, and that's him right there. And you see for sale. Tommy would have been a little older there. And I have some photos showing his age here coming up with a group of horses. That's a pretty good, cool deal. So one cool thing I want to talk about tonight, people watching like Tracy and Jan and Dean and a lot of the breeders of the day that knew Lynn real well. I'm going to be 29 pictures into this episode tonight before we even start talking about the breeding program. So that shows you how much the family did with their kids and showing POAs all over the country. It really was a family ordeal and just not a a breeding operation. Of course, Lynn turned out to be one of the biggest breeders of all time. I would argue that he probably bred the most POAs ever registered. I mean, that's arguable. You would have to look it up in the office. And that he probably owned the most because he bought and sold a lot of POAs even up to the last few years. He'd buy, if he heard somebody needed a POA, he'd buy one just to have it, and then he'd call them and say, hey, I got one that'd fit you. It might be a gilding, it might be something he wasn't planning on using himself. He just was trying to help out a member. So, yes, I can see the comments, Tracy. So, mainly you, but I can see the comments. That's why I asked you if you could hear me, because Jan said she couldn't. So, okay, so Tracy agrees with me. She's also a fellow historian. She thinks Lynn probably owned the most as well. So here's a cool picture. I know that's Dave Morris in the background. His face is half blocked out. I'm not sure who the gentleman is handing the package to Winona, but that's Winona and Lynn. That's a good picture. If you look at their hair, you can tell they've been working. Lynn's hair's wet on the side. I imagine that was at an international show, which nowadays you call the Congress, and it's always hot in the summer. Lynn was a hard-working man, and he devoted a lot of time and energy to the POAC, especially on the board of directors, and he was always helping out at the major shows. And here it looks like they were giving a gift to Winona. And I put this in order because now I'm going to show a bunch of pictures of costumes, and she made all the kids' costumes. So I believe that's Salty Plains there. He doesn't look too happy. The horse is all right, but he don't look too happy to be on there. But we'll talk about him later. But I wanted to show us all these different costumes, and again, just reiterate how much Winona was a big part of the POAs in the 60s and the 70s while her kids was growing up and showing all over. She made all these costumes, and she made their show outfits too, not just costume outfits. But they were known, the Puffenbarger kids were known for their outfits, especially their Native American costumes. There you got to remember the times, you know, the space race and getting to the moon and stuff. So this was the early 60s or late 60s, early 70s, this picture would have been. So looks like he's holding a space rock there. Again, got some cool costumes, got the flag. Now this probably would have been a Salty Pony here, right?
That's Salty Chief.
Chief, that's Chief. And Tommy rode Chief towards the end. He rode Salty 3 Bars as well, but we got a lot of pictures of Salty Chief, and he was a son of Chief Little Britches, of course. So there's a Native American costume. So here's going to be 3 pictures that I think is pretty cool, and I'm going to run through this again. And Tommy is an equestrian. He was a farrier. He's an extension agent for the state of Oklahoma for the OSU program for 4-H. That's what he does as his career. He's very successful at it. So he stayed involved in agriculture and horses. And he made a comment to me one time. He said, you know, I don't know life without Jan Jones in my life, you know, just from POAs. The Jones from Oklahoma, he said, my most first memory, she was there. So that means, you know, his first memories, he can remember being at POA shows and stuff. So that's how long they've been in it. So the first picture was him on the WPF's horse, and then this is St. Nick's Vigilante, but they're both flag pictures. He's a little older. I'd say he was 8 and under in the first one, probably 9 to 12 here. And then there is a teenager sticking a flag, and that's Salty Chief. So I'm going to run through that. That's a pretty cool set there. And I want to again thank the family for opening up their personal scrapbooks. But that's a pretty cool set of pictures there. So there he is jumping. We're going to run through some of these pretty fast, but here's Tommy getting a little older, and he's on a homebred Salty Chief. Yep. And there he is again with the football in his hand. I know Tommy sometimes he didn't play sports much because, you know, he was a farm kid. He grew up working on the farm and stuff, but he did get to go to shows. So here he is as an older teenager, and he rode the stallion who became fairly famous, Salty 3 Bars. Of course, Salty 3 Bars was bought by Lynn as a young stallion from George Bishop. He's an own grandson of 3 Bars, full brother to Barkeeper. He was born in 1972, and he became one of Tommy's last mounts in POAs, and then the Puffenbargers used him for a time as a sire. And of course, he was a grand champion stallion. We'll talk about that. So here's Tommy in '96 at the Tulsa State Fair. and that's his daughter Joni. Right? I don't know what POA that is. Do you know what POA that is? Tommy can tell me later, and I can add that to the comments. That's kind of helps. Yeah, Tracy Keene just said died too young. She means Salty 3 Bars. He died at 11 years old. Lynn did have him for sale. He was consigning him to the sale because Tommy wasn't riding him anymore. Tommy was off in school and doing his own thing. He was aged out. Back then, they didn't have the adult program or the JPFC program, which Tommy would get involved later, a few years down the road. So here's another granddaughter. This is Tiffany, and that's Lynn. He's cut out there. This is actually earlier. This is at the Tulsa State Fair in '92. Again, all three Puffenberger grandkids, Tiffany, Heather, Cody, and Joni, rode POAs and showed POAs. And that's an old Puffenberger bred POA. He doesn't have the Salty name, but I think his name was Bar J's Lucky Britches or something like that. Yeah, he's a full brother to Florida's Fancy Dan. There's pictures of him before he roaned out. Of course, he's a fat old pony there. He's got a big belly. They probably pulled him right out of the pasture, but that's a very cool picture there. We can see Lynn a little bit in that picture, and he's grinning if you can tell. So that's kind of the family part of the show. Now we're going to get into more of the breeding operation, of course, that crossed over with the Puffenbergers. A lot of their breeding horses were shown as well, like Salty 3 Bars and, of course, Chief Little Britches. And this horse as well, we've already seen him. But this is Salty Plains, and he's an early registered POA. So he was one of Lynn's first really good ponies. He had some horses before him, but this was probably one of his first real trophy getters. Somebody just put My Papa, so that's probably Tiffany's watching. I bet she didn't go on the things, but it says My Papa with 3 hearts. So I think she's watched before. But for the late 50s, early 60s, when this horse was bred in the 50s, that's a pretty good looking POA. Kind of classy. That nice blanket and 2 white socks in the back. Nice blaze, and that's a young Lynn Puffenberger there holding him, and he'd be the foundation of his Salty Plains ranch, and his name was Salty Plains. And he kept some of his daughters for quite a while. So here's a cool picture that Lynetta sent me, and this is Lynn having fun at a show. I believe the show was probably in Alva, Oklahoma. That's just 20 miles from Cherokee and 70 miles from where we're sitting right now. And that's Salty Plains. And they used to have fun classes for the adults and stuff when towards the end of the show they'd have like Ride a Buck and Egg and Spoon and stuff like that. And here's one where he's crawling through a barrel. Of course, Lynn used to be skinny as a rail, so a lot of us, when we knew him, he was older and he was a little heavier, but he was always a thinner man. So of course, Lynn taught school for 10 years. He was in mathematics, and I believe he was a assistant principal too, or a vice principal. And after about 10 years of teaching, he was ranching the whole time too. He retired from teaching and turned his talents towards ranching full time. He was a major wheat farmer, and he raised cattle and a lot of horses, 60 to 70 some horses a year probably. He raised some quarter horses and Appaloosas too, but primarily POAs. And of course, he was known for his alfalfa. People all over the country would come and get his alfalfa by the semi-load. So here's another young stallion that he tried for a while. And you notice on the breeding part of it, he always put Lynn and Thomas. That's just kind of back then in the day, you put the son's name or whatever. But this is AA's Pride's Dandy. And he had a pretty good shape for him again for back then. This would have been an early POA. And Lynn used him for a while. He didn't really have an everlasting effect on his program, not as much as Salty Plains did. But he was one of the stallions he used. Tracy said, interesting how many of our founders were teachers. A lot of them were. Well, that's true. And a lot of it was because they could get off in the summers. I believe a lot of founding breeders were farmers and ranchers too. So here's a picture of Lynn. I mean, the mare doesn't look that great in today's standards, but in 1964, she was pretty cool looking. So she was the grand champion mare, and Lynn told me stories about her. He was pretty proud of that moment. She won the national show, grand champion mares. She wasn't bred by Lynn, but Lynn showed her to the title. And that's Skaggs Cherokee Fox's Princess. Of course, Lynn didn't keep her that long. He sold her $1,000 back then, was quite a bit for a 47-inch little pony mare, but she was the grand champion mare. So Here's another salty he had for a while. This is Salty Beaver. Lynn bred to Beaver's Domino that was in Oklahoma, and he kept some of his stuff and crossed it to the Little Britches line over the years. But this was an early salty. In the 60s, before Chief Little Britches hit the scene with the Puffenbargers, you had horses like Salty Jeff, Salty Apple, Salty Beaver, ones like that that started making a name for the salty POAs. Yeah, Jeremy just said this mare was the mare that got Lynn hooked on showing POAs. He told me that's what he told me too, Jeremy. He said the same thing, that when he won Grand at a national show, that pretty much was the thing that kept him going. So, and Jeremy, I will be calling you pretty quick, and you can join me as long as you can. I know you got some time restrictions. It's 7:24 right now, Central Time. Here's another POA that Lynn used for a little while. Red Leopard Stallion, it says here. This is WPF Red Rock Pepper. Again, Lynn liked the WPF stuff that was up in Blue Earth, Minnesota. Here's another one that he consigned to a sale, WPF's Diamond Jack. He didn't have him very long, but pretty good confirmation, early day POA. Keep in mind 50 inches. Totem Siri Desert Night. I don't know the whole story here. Maybe somebody can tell me, Barb or somebody, about this. I know all about Totem Siri Desert Night, but I didn't realize Lynn had him. And I found where Lynn consigned him to a sale in Minnesota, and then I see where he congratulated the people from California that purchased him. So I know he didn't use him much. I don't know if he bought him for 1 year or whatever, but this would have been in the 70s, in the early 70s when he had Chief Little Britches. So now we start another chapter of the Salty Plains Ranch and the Puffenbarger story, and this is the biggest chapter of all, the major one. It's hard to split Lynn Puffenbarger and Chief Little Britches. They just became known so well together throughout the decades. Chief Little Britches is pictured here as a yearling, and he ended up living till he was 30, and he passed away in Cherokee, Oklahoma at 30 years old, and he bred right up to the day he died. So he had a lot of offspring. And this guy was a tremendous little POA, born in 1960. Donna Bridges, I wrote about this in Spots Included. Her cousin had Beaver's Domino, and they were looking for something that was a good little POA, and they found this guy out in Colorado, Chief Little Britches. He had a pony mom and an Appaloosa sire, and they broke him out. He was an early colt because he was bred by a horse breeder, so he was born real early in the year. So they actually showed him as a yearling, and Donna was small, so that's him as a yearling in this picture. And you know, he had, 200 and some foals, and he lived to be 30 years old. So I'd say training him as a yearling didn't hurt him a bit. So, but he was a pretty cool POA. He won Reserve Grand several times. He never won Grand, but he was close. Lynn's told me a few stories about a couple of shows that I'll mention here a little later. And of course, he won all kinds of stuff in riding, and he was a fast POA too, very quick, and so was his offspring. So this is the picture. Jeremy kind of told us earlier that the 64 is when Lynn got hooked with that mare. Well, he told me something like that here when they went to Minnesota. They actually leased Chief Little Britches the first year, and then they bought him, I believe, in 68. But they went to the 67 International in Minnesota, and if you see, all three kids here are holding big Minnesota plaques. With them are national trophies, because the International was in Albert Lee, Minnesota that year. And the Puffenbarger kids cleaned up, and Little Britches almost won Grand that year. Lynn said the judge kept going back and forth between the two stallions, and he said it was the longest he's ever seen since. He told me this story about 10 years ago, and he said, and then he finally picked the other stallion, and Little Britches was the small stallion winner, and he went on to be reserved. But he told me he knew they were on the right track and that they were going to do good. So that was in 67. When that happened. So here's Loretta riding Chief Little Britches. She rode him for a little while, but he was pretty short, so and he was used as a breeding animal so much that was probably hard for him to keep showing him. But I know they did show him into the 70s a little bit. Lynn showed him in halter quite a bit. This is a famous picture. This isn't a rare picture here. I published this in Spots Included. It's been in the POA magazine, but it's a cool picture. He's pretty hefty in this picture there. He's pretty heavy. There's a picture I'd never seen before. A Shirley Rice picture. That would have been at the 68 National Show. Cool picture. There's another picture I'd never seen. Lynn with his back number. And he's standing in for junior or senior in reserve, it looks like. Because that's how you put the ones going sideways and the other ones facing that direction. So looks like he's just waiting for the placings there. So here's a portrait. The Puffenbargers were nice enough to allow me to show this tonight. This hangs in the Puffenbarger house. It's hung in Lynn and Wynona's house for years. I remember seeing it. And this is a pretty good rendition of Chief Little Britches. He did roan, you know, over the years, but he kept his spots. So here's an ad. I kind of put this ad in here to show the bloodlines that Lynn was promoting. You know, Prince Plotted, Joker B, and then he goes on and on. Of course, 3 bars. Lynn was one of the early pioneer breeders that introduced a lot of quarter horse breeding. That's what led him to Salty 3 bars, and he bred a lot of quarter horse mares that were well bred to Chief Little Britches. And he took some little Chief Little Britches daughters and bred them to some good quarter horse stallions, well bred, like 3 bars horses. He wanted to put speed into his animals, and that helped him out in the long run. So we have quite a few Get a Sire pictures here, and this is one of them. Lynn's holding a big silver platter there. So here's Stormy Britches. Stormy Britches wasn't bred by Lynn, but I do believe he ended up with this mare. The mother is a quarter horse, Jane J-Rowe. She actually, that name came from, I think, a Miss America in Oklahoma. But Chief Little Britches bred that mare and got Stormy Britches. Of course, Stormy Britches and Smoky Britches were both early sons of Chief Little Britches that helped Chief Little Britches become famous. But Lynn did own Stormy Britches, and he consigned him to a sale up in Iowa. That's another thing, and Tommy and I was talking about this a couple days ago. Lynn would go all over to sales. He'd go to Tennessee, Ohio, Minnesota with trailer loads of his product. You know, 5 or 6 POAs, and he wasn't there to inventory them. He'd sell them, and he'd sell them to kids all over the country, and he didn't always get the highest prices, but they went on to show, and they showed all over in all different states. Of course, Stormy Britches became the sire of Stormy Britches Jr., and this is him here with young Tom Morris. This would have been at the 87 International Show in Oklahoma City. Casey Montgomery picture. And Stormy Britches Jr., of course, was a famous little stallion. Then he became a famous gelding, and he spent a big part of his life with the Morris Hampton families in Edmond, Oklahoma. So another early day POA that didn't have the Salty name, but he was bred by the Puffenbargers, is that's him right there, and that's Chief Beaver Britches, isn't it? As a little kid, when I first got into POAs, 8 years old or so, I thought it was amusing to say Chief Little Britches, Chief Beaver Britches, and Chief Bingo Britches, because that was one of Beaver Britches' foals. But this stallion won the Stallion Stakes Award a record 14 times at the International Show. He's one of the reasons Lynn was the leading breeder for so many years and still is number 3 of all time of international wins, because he won so many classes and all kinds of events. He was a stallion his whole life. And they didn't promote him that much as a stallion. Mainly they showed him as a stallion. And he did have some foals that went on, and some beaver foals that people would know out there. The Schwartzes had him for a long time. Before that, the Denny's. So he was in Hutchinson, Kansas for a long time with 2 great families with a lot of talented girls that showed him. And he was just a great POA, and he was bred by Lynn. And we're going to have some more pictures of him. Here's Jill at the 82 World winning with him. And here he is in, I believe, 84, winning one of his 14 titles. I believe he won the Stallion Stakes 7 years in a row, and he won it 14 years. There's one of the executive directors at the time, and that's, I believe, Eula Gayweiler holding the plaque there. And I included this picture. This is Jim Schwartz. He was president of the club a year after Lynn was for 1 or 2 years, and his daughters showed him. Of course, Jenny Lee won with him, won the Versatility with him in 1987. Lynn Puffenbarger was the first breeder to bred a Grand Champion POA, which he ended up breeding a bunch of them, and then also breeding a Versatility winner. And because Chief Little Britches won in '87, the third one, he's still, to my knowledge, the only stallion ever to win it. So here's Lynn showing, I believe that's Chief, Salty Chief, and Tommy ended up riding him. Lynn liked to show his horses in conformation classes, and here he is in Ventura, California. Of course, that's the '77 International. The International show was in California twice, in '70 and '77. And the Puffenbergers did well in '77 out there. And he was a pretty nice looking POA. Again, a lot of horse on the bottom side. Of course, Chief Little Britches has horse too. You know, his dad's a horse. But here's the pedigree of him. Salty Plains, Lynn's first real good stallion, is the grandsire on the bottom, and then Chief Little Britches was the sire. And that's quite a bit. That was probably 1980, I think, sale, and he sold for $4,300. So, of course, he was a Supreme Champion as well. Now, here's Salty Dew. I don't have a lot of great pictures of Salty Dew. She's always been one of my favorite Salty POAs. She won the International show in 1976, Grand Champion mare. Lynn sold her as a young mare at the sale, and the Cheeseburrows, Anna Claire from New York, purchased her. Had a lot of potential. Lynn showed her before he sold her, and she's double-bred Chief Little Britches. But she became Lynn's first Grand Champion mare, and we're going to talk about all the Grand Champions Lynn produced and another record that he had. But, of course, he had a gelding named Salty Apple, I believe, won in the 60s, like 66. That was his first Grand Champion gelding, and then he had a bunch of mares win. And then Salty Three Bars won, but he wasn't the breeder of him, but he wore his prefix. I believe this is her here. This might be a full sister, but I think this is Dew. He had a full sister named Miss that looked like a twin, and she looked just like her, and he sold her at the sale too. But I'm judging by Lynn's jacket there that this is Dew. And here she is when Anna Claire sold her to the Harpers, Don and Donna of Michigan, for $3,000, which was a lot of money. I believe that was in '74 or '5. And she went on the next year. The people that are in the picture there, the one guy anyway, they won Grand Champion mare with her. Here she is in '76 winning the world, and that's the same year she won Grand Champion mare. Here's a POA that tragically didn't live that long, Salty Skipper Britches. Again, he's one of my favorite Salties. For unknown Salties, he's about my favorite. He's one of the leading sires of Salties. The Morris family, Dave and Bonnie, had him in Edmond, Oklahoma. And look at this horse. He is a model POA. He was Chief Little Britches to a quarter horse stallion. I believe he was about 4 when he died in a freak accident. But he was a beautiful stallion. He showed a little bit, but he never reached his potential. He had some pretty good foals that became Hall of Famers, and one of them is this little mare here, shown by Tommy Morris, and this is 2D Skipper Babe. And 2D Skipper Babe was a multiple champion, real pretty mare, and of course she's in the POAC Hall of Fame. So here's Salty Ember Britches. This was another Chief Little Britches Supreme Champion. I don't have all the Supreme Champion pictures. According to POAC.org, there's been 16 Salty or Puffenbarger bred Supreme Champions. I think there's more than that. I think there's a few left off, but I'm going to name some of them real quick so I don't miss that. Just bear with me. I'm going to go from the latest ones down to the early ones. So we have Salty Look at Me, Salty Scarlet, Tudor Bars, Salty Spice, Itchy's Mr. Bar, Salty Tardy Britches, Salty Sand Satin, Salted BVDs, Barbie's Lucky Britches, Salty Mighty Bar, Chief Beaver Britches, Salty Ember Britches that we're looking at right there, Salty Bunny Britches, Salty Chief, Salty Little Britches, and Salty Cactus Britches. So that's the list, and there could be some missing. You know, the website's not always perfect. We make mistakes, but that's the list that I found on there. So here's a good picture of Lynn getting an award for Chief Little Britches. I believe that's his Premier Sire Award from George Lalonde, who was the executive secretary at the time. So Lynn actually helped move the Lalondes from Texas to Iowa when they moved. That's how big a part Lynn was in POAs. He would lend a hand with the trailer or sweat equity. The Woodwards from Tennessee were very good friends of the Puffenbargers. I know Tommy spent time in Tennessee, I believe, in the summer, and I think the Woodward kids came to Cherokee and spent some time. And this is Salty Mighty Bar, and this is Chuck Woodward. They were a good team in the late 70s. Here's Itchy's Mr. Bar. Now, Itchy's is the Woodwards prefix, but makes sense since they're friends. It was actually bred by the Puffenbargers, this POA was. A multiple champion, here shown with Kelly Bridges. I threw this picture in here because Lynn never concentrated that much on color genetics, and he did have some solids. One thing he didn't have much of was Overheiss. For his record of POAs he bred, he bred for a lot of POAs that stayed in the limit, and he pushed it on breeding to quarter horses. He bred to quarter horses with thoroughbred blood, but he just got it down over the years where he bred such small mares to stallions that really wasn't an issue. But he bought this filly from Dean Damon, Ellen Damon, or Eileen Damon here. That's, of course, Dean's mother. This would have been 1981 at the international sale, and she went on to be kind of a later foundation mare for him, like in his second or third wave of raising POAs. She had a lot of few spots for him, and he liked the Ladies Warrior. He had a Ladies Warrior daughter that had quite a few Supreme Champions for him, and then this was a Ladies Warrior granddaughter. And she grew up to be a tiny little mare, but Jackpot's Misty did a lot for his program. So here's another get a sire picture, and that would be Chief Beaver Britches in the front. I think that's probably Jerry Denny. That's Jerry Denny. And then is that Loretta with Cuyahoga Spider Britches. And then who's in the back there?
Stormy Britches.
That's Stormy Britches. Okay. All right. So, and that would be Mr. Woodward, right? Sean, who was...
I don't know who that is.
It looks like a older guy. You know, it doesn't look like a kid. And I know they had... Did they have Stormy Britches? Yeah, they had Stormy Britches. Smoky Britches was owned by Mr. Roderick, who was the legendary wrestling coach for OSU here in Stillwater. So he owned him for many years, the Okie Dokie POAs. So here's another one where he won. Chief Little Britches won Get a Sire quite a few times. I believe like 3 at the national show. This is back in Ventura again in '77. So I know... Salty Miss Leo's in this picture, and that's probably Chief in the middle. And Cactus. Okay, so 3 very famous POAs there. I think they're all Supreme Champions. I don't know if they were on my list. I think they were. Cactuses. We're going to get to Miss Leo pretty quick. I know we have some big fans of her watching tonight. This is Cactus, right? That's Salty Cactus Britches. And Lynn, that's an early photo there. This is Salted BVDs. It doesn't have the traditional Salty name, but this little pony won a lot of stuff at the national show. Was one of those packers that Lynn's ponies became known for. You know, the Chief Little Britches just would go and go, and they would pack kids, and they were just great POAs to put kids on, and they were fast though. They were smart, but they were quick too. I don't know who this POA is. I think this is about 71 or 2 in Iowa. I know it's in Iowa because I recognize that banner. It's at the national sale. But that's Lynn. He must have brought a baby there and was proud of it, so they took a picture of it. It's a good-looking POA. Somebody might know who that is and chime in. Here's Salty Little Britches. I got in arguments with people about this POA when I was 10, 12 years old because a lot of people always thought he was a Chief Little Britches, which his name lends to that, Salty Little Britches. But Lynn actually bred a dragon daughter to Chief Little Britches and got Miss Dragon Britches. And then that was bred to Piney Bar, who was a quarter horse stallion that Lynn actually stood for a while. And out came Salty Little Britches. And this guy won 28 international classes. I know that because Piney Bar, that's the main POA he sired that won, and he won that many classes. Here he's selling in 1977 as a 10-year-old for $5,200. That's a good price back in 77. There he is. Of course, he was in Hennessy, Oklahoma for quite a while with the Eckroats. This is young Kerry showing him. There he is again. He won.